Hi, I'm Christina, and welcome to this episode of Women's Health, Wealth, and Happiness Interviews to Inspire. Today's guest has a life journey that has been shaped by deep listening, bold freedom, and the power of community. From overcoming a PTSD ridden past to becoming a vibrant and aligned creative, she has transformed her health by tuning into divine guidance. Her pursuit of financial freedom has allowed her to explore alternative healing and spiritual growth. Through her awakening, she's discovered that true happiness is rooted in knowing we are never alone. Please join me in welcoming visionary artist, creator, foodie, Karin.
That was a nice introduction. I was born in Erie, Pennsylvania, and we had fairly large family, 5 kids. And I had early on got a love of nature and the Lake Erie I grew up on and spent a lot of time there. And early on I got inspired by art and creativity and words. They all meant a lot to me. I also had a lot of trauma growing up related to my older brother being sick and special needs, and there was a lot going on with that. And I think the combination of that journey just led me down a path of, always wanting to understand communication and always wanting to understand, creativity and what's it all about? Why are we here? That was always a big question. Like, I think at first you're just told you're here to grow up and get a job, and do what everyone else does. And that never made sense to me. So I have really enjoyed pursuing different creative fields. I was in advertising for a long time. I had my own agency for 20 years. I have worked on wearable tech as CEO for wearable tech programs. I've, had some interesting volunteers. I've canned it all and traveled around the world. And then I've also, I went back to my artistic and communication roots, and I really have been painting. There's a painting on my whatever side that is, and I do a lot of work with flowers and photography, and I'm just photographing the consciousness of flowers because along with the metaphysical journey and the spiritual journey, they have started communicating with me and telling me what they're doing for the big shift that's taking place right now. And they said, share my message. And I'm like, people will think I'm crazy. And they're like, yeah, but so what?
Karin, your health word is listening. Tell us a little bit more about how listening means health to you.
Well, I think I grew up in a culture where deep listening to yourself or to others was non-existent. It wasn't really something that we did. We kind of went through the motions. If you really had a serious deep problem, it was more like, well, suck it up, instead of someone actually listening to you and finding out what's really going on. And probably, everybody I know has gone through quite a bit of that. And it was much later in my life when I really hit a rock bottom point of health and satisfaction out of my life that I turned to some more alternative wellness modalities. A whole bunch of circumstances had sort of pointed me in a left turn, and I had my first massage, and I met an acupuncturist who's quite famous these days, and they actually listened to me, and I was like, what? They heard, that I was in pain, and because doctors had all dismissed me growing up, and when I got sicker and sicker, the doctors dismissed me even more. So these people were actually listening to me, and then they basically helped me in various sundry ways, and they taught me how to start to listen to myself as well. And really, in order to heal, they had to hear me, listen to me, and I had to listen to them. And that sort of took a long time because I grew up, not ever listening to, or learning to never listen to myself, even like whether I liked something or didn't like something. As kids, we get lessons like, don't talk to strangers. That means you're not listening to yourself, whether that's a good person or not anymore. You're following a rule instead of listening or hearing. And listening is a much broader term than just listening to music. It's actually really hearing the essence of what's going on and being able to see, all the components, the energy, the auras, the intentions, those are all part of listening. And I used to say, but it's not so much true anymore. Like, if our bodies could talk, what would they tell us? And they can talk, so I don't say that so much anymore. But if you really, I had to learn to meditate. I had to learn to do a lot of things that were outside my upbringing and my familiarity, and let go of a lot of ideas that had been embodied by me. And it's an ongoing process. I swear, it takes you get to another level and you're like, whoa, I could even go deeper with this, hearing what's out there. And so now it's, even when I'm working with my paintings or the flowers or anything, I'm listening to what they're asking me to do. I'll say, what colors do you want me to add next? And listening to them as well as listening to my own body. So it's kind of, it's not about my wellness journey. It's about the entire journey, no longer separating your spiritual from your physical and your emotional from your intellectual, all that stuff works together.
When you described your health, you mentioned PTSD. Can you share a little bit more about that and what that means to you?
I was in my late 40s when I discovered that I had it all my life. And though several people had said you have the symptoms of PTSD, I had my ad agency at the time, and I had a client come to me that was a PTSD clinic, and they wanted to be rebranded, and they wanted to expand their operation. So typically I would learn everything about a client. So I dove into their materials, and the more I read their materials, the more I was like, this is a divine bestowance on me to give me this from this sort of circuitous route. And I realized by reading all the materials that I actually had what they call, well, there's no calling things, I don't like to name things, but basically I had transferred PTSD. So it wasn't really mine, it was my mom's. And it was my mom's because she was traumatized by what happened to my brother about the time I was 5 months old, which had gotten very, very sick with, probably from a vaccine, with some epilepsy. And then the hospitals had overdosed him and he went into a coma. And he really never came out of that. And, the short story is that my parents were told that, take him home, make him feel comfortable, he won't live long. And he actually died in 2023. So he lived 64 years. But that trauma of my mom got buried deep inside of me and buried inside of her. And it became the groundwork for how I processed emotions for the rest of my life. I didn't know it was there because it was never talked about. My brother was considered part of the family and we all helped out. I mean, I was the next in line child. So, I remember teaching him how to crawl and, helping in certain ways, but I didn't, we were told that everything's normal. Like, there was no trauma there. There was no sadness around it. It just was what it was, which in a way is a beautiful ideal. But when stuff gets buried deep inside of you and you don't articulate it and get it out, you do suffer the rest of your life. However you suffer, everybody could suffer differently. But for me, I had no words for it because it happened when I was an infant. So for me, it was just, my expression of things not going right was to tear up and cry instead of talk about it, because I just didn't, that was my foundation. So I started unwinding it all, and I became a PTSD practitioner for me and my mom. And my dad so much didn't carry it like my mom and I did, but I started rebuilding the story, getting her to tell the story, and she started opening up, and it was very, very difficult conversations, but it helped, and the whole family was benefiting from it. And now it's an open conversation in our family, but it formed, how I related to people. And I couldn't relate to people because I couldn't go in with my infantile emotions and, and be in a good relationship. So that's how I think it affected me. But it's, pretty much all better now, or mostly better now. And you can see the big picture, how that drove me into the alternative wellness industry, but it also drove me to work with intuitive people who taught me how to read everything, not just, what's right in front of you, but everything, the whole package, what's, the chemical, the physical, the energetic, the spiritual piece of whatever you're dealing with. And that, you know, that was freeing for me, just suddenly I felt like this world made sense to me.
What I find interesting too is in talking about that journey that it was brought to you to be working on that through your ad agency for PTSD and to learn about it in a divine sort of way to bring all of this to you. What has
Yeah.
been the most amazing thing that you've learned during your journey about letting that go and moving into listening to divine?
I have a lot of amazing milestones. I think the most amazing thing really though is that, you know, when you feel alone and depressed, which is leading up to that cathartic moment of realization that I had a path forward, I really did feel isolated and depressed. I pushed through it because we were taught to push through it. And I really wasn't one to go for medications. I think that was partly because I needed to feel everything to get to where I needed to be. And I was highly functional depressive. So nobody knew like I knew. But anyway, I think the realization is that when you get to that point, you realize that you can become your own best friend, and you have, opening up to more divine resources all around you. It's like if you want to be alone, you can be with the flowers, you can be with the trees, you can be with nature, you can be with the angels, it doesn't matter. You're never really alone. Just realizing that, and that all these all these everything around you is here to support you in some way. It's either here to support you or nudge you in another direction. And you can tell because if it's contractive energy, it's nudging you. If it's expansive energy, it's supporting you and drawing you in. So it's really easy to like figure it out. And we're human, so we make mistakes and we stub our toe, and you know, it's not like things aren't going to continue to come up, but lots of times when you do stuff like that, it's because you're not fully aware at the moment, and or not in your truth. So for me, it brought me to my truth. And the nice thing about my truth and what I know right now is that I can change it as I expand. I cannot hang on to it. Like if I find that, wearing white is my truth right now, tomorrow I can change it to wearing black. It's all good. You can keep shifting because truth is just a current understanding. And that was probably, knowing you're not alone and knowing that truth is our current understanding. And sometimes we have a very big collective current understanding, and that's what helps us build the rocket ships to get to the moon, or have big governments and big countries. And then we have the individual truths and individual understandings that can shift, as we learn, as we grow. If I had been taught in school that what I was being taught by like math and science, those more regimented pieces of our learning, if I had taught it's all a current understanding, I think I would have felt better all along, instead of saying, well, this is a fact and this is, I'm like, it's actually just not, it's current understanding. A funny story, I was saying this theory to someone once, and they said, please tell me you believe the earth is round. And I was like, I don't even know if I should answer that question.
And how has your wellness journey affected you as an artist? I love it when you just said taking the pictures of the flowers because they're speaking to you, because I hear the Lorax. I speak for the trees because you know what they're feeling. How has that affected you as an artist?
After I sold my ad agency, I needed to expand. And the very first thing I did was start taking art. I felt like I needed to either go to a therapist or start painting, and I chose painting. And so I had a I had a fine arts degree, but I put it aside for the commercial art degree or path. And then, so I just started painting light. I'm just like, I'm going to throw color. I'm going to paint the light of what I see, not the shape and not the pattern of what I see, but just the light, and light is always reflecting color. So, I'm just going to paint the light as I see it. And that just helped open me up. It was really quite cathartic. And then I've always loved the communication behind things. So I would write short poems, titles or haikus to go with the art that I would pull out of the art. Like I would paint it and then later I'd be sitting with it and I'd say, okay, tell me, tell me what people could see in writing from this painting. Because people are always trying to make sense out of something abstract. And so a lot of my work had, I was allowing it to take those directions of like communicating to me. And the more I opened up through the art, the more symbols came to me and stuff that were transformative. Like this is a infinity symbol. I've painted the infinity at nauseum. I'm still painting it. And it's for me, it was like a fixed mathematical symbol that always got dismissed as like, you know, how could we dismiss something that's the vastest part of all of the mathematical sciences, And so I just started painting it and giving it form and giving it flight. And a lot of my infinities turned into angelic infinities with wings that were flying, and they're just basically trying to bring in the vastness and the potentiality of understanding infinity, like understanding that we have so much yet to accomplish and learn and experience here in our human life. And it became, I think it opened me up to the point where felt like my art was suddenly part of the great consciousness shift that's taking place on the earth right now. And I was really having fun doing that until the flowers started speaking to me. And I'm like, you know what? I'm not a flower photographer. And they're like, yeah, but you can see what we're doing. And so that I started paying attention, listening to the flowers and taking pictures of them. And then I got some macro lenses and started really going inside of them. And I think being an artist and being all the freeing I've done for myself, it's just been really fun to follow whatever whim comes to me, and they came to me. So like this is a passion flower, but for me, it's a shift in consciousness. I could feel the energy, pouring out of that into the room, So all my paintings and photographs are designed to like shift the energy of whoever's looking at them or the space that they're in. So
Wow.
they co-create with me. So that's that's how it shaped everything.
Wow. And you have such a vast knowledge of art from your fine arts degree to running the agency, creating art, and now as a photography artist, a painter. What advice would you give to someone who is trying to step into their passion, and how should they listen to themselves in that creativity?
Well, the easiest way to listen is to meditate. And you may not hear messages when you meditate, but you could actually journal some questions, then meditate, and then journal again to see what comes out of you without caring what happens, because sometimes when you meditate, you have another kind of transformation. I mean, the real crux of meditating is to allow whatever needs to happen to you. I'm a big fan of meditating without sound and without voices, but that's me personally. I think that everybody should have different ways to meditate. And there may be like you start out with voices and sounds, but 1 minute a day is better than nothing. But it's the meditating that allows us the space to connect. And if you're not ready for meditating, you can go for a walk without your headset on. You can go do yoga because you don't wear your headset and you're really supposed to be listening to your body when you're doing yoga, and every yoga pose, I mean, yoga is technically a religion, and every yoga pose is designed to get you some kind of deep connection to divine in yourself. And so I know people in this country tend to do it for exercise and stretching and to stay in shape, but it really doesn't matter if that's why you get into it. It's still doing the other stuff. So you can go sit in a field of flowers. You don't even have to close your eyes to meditate. You can just sit in a field of flowers, turn off your electronics. Hey, the real crux of it is to turn off the electronics while you're meditating, whether you're doing yoga or walking or sitting still or laying down. And you can change it up, and feel it. If you begin a journaling process, and I'm not saying, journal about all your relationships and journal about, if your cat threw up that day or not, but I'm just saying, journal random stuff that comes to you, and writing it down makes it more real. And you can go back sometimes and look, or just the act of writing it down incorporates it into your day. But there's so much that comes through us, and we don't pause and hear it. And all the studies show, the latest studies show that your information comes through your heart. And when you meditate, you get more connected to your heart. So the more connected you are to your heart, the more you can listen. It's just the way it goes. There's a million billion ways to do it, but the point is to start with what gets you started, I mean, listening to guided meditations is a great way to start. 1-minute meditation is a great way to start. Going to yoga class is a great way to start. Meditate in church. Instead of listening to the message, just go into a state of meditation. Journal, it's a really fun thing to do, is sometimes journal some questions with your right hand or your dominant hand, and then write the answers with your non-dominant hand, see what comes out. And you can, sometimes that just switches what's allowed, information is allowed to come through you. It's really quite fun to do. Sometimes when I'm painting, for the artists out there, sometimes when I'm painting, I tend to not paint things that are representative of what is. I like to paint potential somehow. But if you're painting and your mind wants to paint a barn and you want to see what else you can do, sometimes you can let yourself have a barn picture for one painting, and then on the side you just throw colors on it, and so your mind has something to do and your heart has something to do, and you can see what happens. You may throw away one of them, but it doesn't matter. You can play games like that with yourself. We're like, okay, this one's going to be a controlled picture, but this one over here, we don't care. We're going to let it be channeled, divinely, or from your heart, or from, a higher place of some kind.